You awake now? All right. I want to welcome you all to this year's Martin Luther King Jr. Community Brunch. This is the start of a week of activities celebrating the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And today is the national holiday celebrating the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Before I came over here today, I read a couple of documents. I read Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. I also read his letter from the Birmingham jail. I studied a little bit. We'll study a little bit more this week. I was a youngster in Washington, D.C. In the 6th grade at the March on Washington. I was a teenager in Flint, Michigan. So I marched. I can't honestly say I understood what it all meant when I was younger. But more importantly, as I study this week, and I ask us all to study, the man, the movement, because the dream has not been fulfilled yet. As I look around this room, I see this beautiful quilt, faces, different colors, different ethnicities, different nationalities, coming together this morning and this week to celebrate Dr. King. But the dream isn't fulfilled yet. I've had people tell me we've made progress in this country, and I think we have. I can stand here and say there's a youngster going to visit my family in Mississippi. I was turned away from those restaurants and said white only. I lived that. My parents lived that, my brothers and sisters. So we've made progress, but the dream isn't fulfilled yet. For the first time in the history of this country, in our public school systems, students of color outnumber Caucasian students in America. But also, our schools are more segregated now than they were 40 years ago. So let me talk a little bit about that second document I read, this letter from the Birmingham jail. Dr. King was dismayed by some of his supporters because they saw the wrongs, wanted to right them, but they didn't want to agitate anybody. They wanted to play nice and not talk about the ugly stuff. I'm not up here to talk about the ugly stuff, but up here to talk about the reality that the dream has not been fulfilled yet. The Civil Rights Project at UCLA has done research and says that Michigan is the 12th most segregated state in this country. Housing, differentials on payments between people of color, they still exist. And I mention this not to put a damper on the activities today, but the dream isn't fulfilled yet. We're celebrating a dream, right? And all that work. In March, we're going to celebrate the Selma to Montgomery March. I know there's a movie out about it now, only 50 years ago, in March. And Dr. King was looking for justice for all Americans, not only just African Americans, all Americans. was looking for economic equality for all Americans. And he believed in the power of voting. The dream isn't fulfilled yet. Between the 2008 and 2012 elections, voters between the ages of 18 and 29 decreased by 1.8 million. In that same demographic, only 21% of those 18 to 29-year-olds voted in this past midterm elections. And when 18-year-olds got the right to vote back in 1971, 50% of the people in that demographic voted. I mention that because the dream isn't fulfilled yet. So I'm going to challenge us all this week as we provide today of service today on his national holiday, as we watch documentary films, as we celebrate Dr. King. I want you all to study, because what he did back in the 1950s and 60s until his death in 1968 was to start a movement. And yes, we moved. We have a ways to go yet. I'm going to study this week. I'm going to ask us all to study this week. Celebrate the man, but also celebrate the dream and actually act upon the dream. I want to thank you all for coming. I look forward to hearing from our keynote speaker. When I met Mr. Oliver and his wife earlier, and they're sitting right here in front of me. His wife's parents are here, and their beautiful children are here. Mrs. Oliver told me she went to Flint Central, and I shook her hand anyway. I went to Flint North. It's all good. So this week, let's study. Celebrate his legacy, his work, his life, and let's keep working on the dream. Thank you all for coming this morning. Enjoy the oratorical contest. I want to thank our dash musicians. I'm looking forward to hearing fish and chips. Thank you for being here.
I was honored to be asked to share in such a special occasion. You don't get the chance to raise consciousness every day. To Minority Student Services and the Office of Multicultural Advancement, thank you. Thank you for committing to celebrating the MLK holiday on the campus of Central Michigan University. This event marks 10 years of MSS specifically celebrating. It also marks 10 years of MSS or of the administration observing the holiday with a day off. It may seem hard to believe that 10 years ago, CMU students would recite MLK poems in various locations across campus in between classes to have the opportunity we all share here in Finch Fieldhouse. Again, I say to the staff of CMU's Minority Student Services, thank you. I will say, it's time to commit to commitment. While MLK Day is regularly celebrated at CMU, his dream has not been fully realized in our country. We have not fully accepted responsibility for fulfilling the dream. Part of the problem is our fault, my fault. I was here during the unrelenting fights for the day off between 2002 and 2005. 2005, they gave us a 3-year trial. 10 years later, you all are still here celebrating the dream. But part of what we began to do when we celebrated MLK is we deify him. But MLK was far from unreachable. My wife and I watched Selma Saturday night, and it reminded me how common MLK was. He was a brother of the fraternity I love. He was a student and a father, a preacher of the gospel and a husband. He had bills, and he had concerns. Bigger than anything else, Brother King had the ability to influence others to embrace their power. Today, he's bigger than life, and few of us have found a way to connect to him. And for my part in that, I apologize. I challenge you all to study our leaders and to connect to them. MLK was my age when he met regularly with President Lyndon B. Johnson. I like to think I'm fairly young, so again I say students, very close to peers, study the folks we celebrate. I challenge you to do that. To the Board of Trustees, President Ross, Flint Northern graduate, I shook his hand too. I went to Flint Northwestern. Faculty and staff, good morning. When asked to give this speech, I was honored to know that someone thought enough of me to ask me to share my thoughts. I struggle with what to share with you. I toyed with the idea of sharing my experiences here at CMU, or the road to graduation, or my experiences working in what is described as post-racial America. I even considered walking you through a history lesson of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It's important to note here that we have come a long way in 50 years, but we are reminded consistently that not a lot has changed. To that end, none of the aforementioned thoughts were on my heart to share. I wanted to share something with you that would inspire you, to encourage you. I wanted to provoke you. I wanted to move you. I wanted to make you share with your neighbor, I love you, man. The combination of power and love realizes everything we need. After you heard a bio, filled with a whole lot of stuff, a little bit of influence and some authority, you probably recognize that it lacked significant power. Because power, it resides with you, collectively. MLK said, power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is the power correcting everything that stands against love. That leads me to our topic, an area that few of us are prepared to play in. If I were to choose a title for what's left of this conversation, I would title it, Comfort Over Change. I hope that has you thinking. But I will warn you, when it comes to thinking, there are a couple types of people. Those who act without thinking. These are people who, when faced with problems, become so uncomfortable that they demand immediate solutions. These folks are not willing to tolerate discomfort long enough to analyze the situation that faces them and develop a plan of action. The second group of people are those who think about situations but never act. I am reminded of a story. I tell this story a lot. It's the story of a woman who was walking down the street. She came across a man sitting at his porch, and a dog was laying at his feet moaning. She spoke to the man and asked him, "Why is your dog moaning?" The man simply said, "He's sitting on a nail." The woman looked at him astonished and said, "Why is he sitting on a nail?" The man replied, "He is sitting on a nail because he is not uncomfortable enough yet." We live in a world full of situations that are uncomfortable, and yet we stay. We are in jobs we hate, we hang out with people we don't like, we are involved in activities that we know are detrimental to our success, we have attitudes that we know will not lead to success, but why? It's a known quantity. This is a familiar experience. This is a familiar discomfort. We sit on the nail, it causes us some pain, but it's okay. Because it's a familiar pain. I know this pain. I have friends whose solution to everything is simply pray and wait for something to happen. They have a morbid reliance on God. They say they're always praying about something, but they never do anything. I remind them that James 2:17 says that faith without works is dead. Your faith should somehow manifest itself in action. Not only do we need to be active, but we need to be informed. This seems like a simple proposition. Why is it difficult? Because we don't want to embrace our power. We want someone else to accept responsibility for us, for what happens to us, to make decisions for us. You see, the problem with power is that it comes with some responsibility. Let's discuss this responsibility. Let's get a bit uncomfortable. Let's have what my mom would describe as family time. Allow me this opportunity to share a few quotes to frame our family time. Quote, "I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly, end quote. Letter from a Birmingham jail, 1963. Quote, I do not know many Negroes who are eager to be accepted by white people, still less to be loved by them. They, the blacks, simply don't wish to be beaten over the head by the whites every instant of our brief passage on this planet. White people will have quite enough to do in learning how to accept love and themselves and each other. And when they have achieved this, which will not be tomorrow, may very well be never, the Negro problem will no longer exist, for it will no longer be needed. James Baldwin, 1963. Final quote, my favorite. My kids are smart, educated, beautiful, polite children. There have been smart, educated, beautiful, polite black children for hundreds of years. The advantage that my children have is that my children are encountering the nicest white people that America has ever produced. Let's hope America keeps producing nicer white people, end quote. Chris Rock. Every conversation of social justice leads us to choose a side. Personal accountability, and this is when my people get to beat up on Bill Cosby and Charles Barkley and just recently Kendrick Lamar about taking responsibility. But it's polarized by this opposite that is systemic change. Let's spend some time in the middle. Fact. On average, a black male is killed by authorities every 28 hours. I apologize in advance for the redundancy, but there are a few occurrences that are becoming all too regular for society, described by many as post-racial. Ferguson. Fact. Michael Brown was killed by Officer Darren Wilson. Was his hands up in a surrendering position, or were his hands up in a surrendering position? I'm not sure. But I know that it's not okay that any man lay in the middle of a Ferguson street, face down, lifeless, for 4 hours. That makes you feel uncomfortable. It should. In Staten Island, New York, Eric Gardner was put in a chokehold by a New York City police officer. During that time, he stated these 3 words: I can't breathe. 14 times. This was ultimately ruled a homicide, but ended with no indictment of the police officers involved. Cleveland, Ohio, Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old boy reportedly brandishing a fake gun, was killed while reaching for the airsoft replica in his waistband within 2 seconds of police arriving on the scene. This doesn't make you feel uncomfortable. It should. In 2011, there were more African Americans in prison or under the watch of the justice system than enslaved in the United States in 1850. Since 1971, when President Nixon declared a war on drugs, there has been a 700% increase in U.S. prison population. African Americans make up 12% of the nation's drug users, but represent 34% of those arrested for drug offenses, and 45% of those in state prison for the same offenses. Let's hit home, family. Proposal 2, race as a determining factor in college admissions. Or the use of affirmative action programs that give preferential treatment in state contracting, employment, and higher education. 33% less African Americans are enrolled in Michigan colleges since its passing in 2006. Knowing that my personal economic self-sufficiency is based on a pathway that included a stop here at CMU, we know that's our way out. To add insult to injury, in 2014, Michigan Supreme Court upheld Michigan's ban on affirmative action, race used as a factor in college admissions, knowing that our legacy status and our athletics are being used. I'm not sharing this to discourage you, family, nor to scare you, but to challenge you. Your power is my hope. I leave you all with this charge to leave the world better than it was when it was given to you. It's about some of us adjusting to a new reality, owning our actions, and in some cases, not only our actions, but the actions of our own ancestry. Again, in the words of Chris Rock, yeah, it's unfair that you get judged by something you didn't do, but it's also unfair that you inherit money that you didn't work for. How do we fix this? How do you fix this? By embracing your power. Stop asking people to think for you. Accept responsibility of questioning everything. Be different. Think bigger. Open your mind. Love, and more than anything, get uncomfortable enough to get off the nail. Thank you.